your handpiece is not running, it's going to be a tough day. You want to look after this handpiece, make sure it's all running nice and clean, especially if you're working in sandy, pumice areas. Make sure we're cleaning that gunk and that rubbish out, giving it a good clean and a grease. Okay, so if we make a start, we'll just take the rubber seal off for the back. And we'll start by just taking the back end off. Ideally, if you can get your hands on a cog spanner. Just crack that. If we just pop that off. That's normally a 12mm spanner in here. Just give that a crack. Okay, now we've got the cogs out. We want to just inspect and look at the cogs, make sure there's no wear in the teeth. So if it's really shiny, really sharp edges, it's pretty obvious when the metal's run out and it's pretty thin. These are pretty good. And if we want to check the bearings, we can just pop that back in there just to see if there's any movement in the bearings. Yep. We also want to check the springs, make sure these are tight. This is always a tricky one. Make sure these are nice and tight, they come apart like that. Make sure that's nice and tight. Perfect. And give that a quick clean while we've got it off. Okay, we've taken the back end now. We want to have a look at the crank here. We've got our main bearing in there, so we want to check in here just to make sure if there's any movement in this crank, just to see if that bearing is changing. Just by giving that a wiggle and a turn, we can feel if that needs changing. We'll put this back together now, and then we'll start stripping the front out. Always make sure that we've got grease in our caps. Okay, so pop the spring back through there, try and hook one piece on. Just try and get that spring back in there, clip back on. We want to be really careful on this bit here. We've got the seal here that goes on the back. We want to make sure that this goes in. If you've taken this out, that goes the right way. There's a lip here, as you can see around the bearing. We need to make sure that when we're putting this back on, that it doesn't fold in on itself. Okay? So what I like to do is just pop it on here. I can feel it's gone on, and then I can just slide it back on. And once I tighten the cog, that'll tighten back on. And then last, cog back in. I always like to put just a dab of oil in here. Pop that in, screw it back on. Now you can, if you want, tighten it back up with your cog screw and your spanner, just to make sure it doesn't come back out. Once you put it on the machine, it's all self-tightening, it'll tighten everything back up itself. So that's the back end. So what we'll do now is we'll just take this out, the front end. Now this front end is really important. It's quite often a good idea to do these weekly, 2 weekly, depending on the conditions that you're shearing. So tension nut off. We'll just take off this fork stop screw now. Once we've taken the screw out, it's a case of just simply making sure that the ball is at the bottom of the race. lift and pull. Sliding sleeve out as well. Make sure you get the ball. And that's the front end out stripped. And if you're ever cleaning with this, always make sure that the water goes down that way. We don't want water ingressing into the bearings here or in the back. So water down there and down here, making sure it's not going to the back. Comb screws. Okay, and what I'm looking for here on the comb screws, any cracks, any wear on the ball, just making sure it's nice and clean. Sliding sleeve. I like to clean this out, making sure that I've cleaned it out nice so I can replace some grease in there. Checking on here, make sure these aren't seized. There's a bit of play in them. We can take these out by twisting them round and pull. Fulcrum cup. What I'd like to do when I'm looking at this is I'm looking right at the back of the cup here for what we call a half moon wear. So that's how I can look at the wear of the fulcrum post and cup. So this being the fulcrum post, very important. You see it comes out the factory with a red dot there. These are set from the factory. Please don't alter this unless you have a setting gauge or you know what you're doing. So what I'm doing is looking for that half moon wear just inside here. If I can see a half moon wear at the back of this cup, I can tell that that post and cup is wearing down as it should. Same again for the tension pin. Just looking for any potential issues, any wear. Okay, now we've stripped the handpiece. Best way to clean these parts is always a bit of hot water, fairy liquid. Fairy liquid's a good grease killer. Give these a clean, make sure they're nice and dry. Now we're ready to put it back together. So I would start just by applying a little bit of grease just in here, the top here. I like to put a tiny dab of grease just in the cup. It's better to have some grease and some lubrication in there if possible. I like to put the tension pin in there. Grease in here for the sliding sleeve. Now it's time to put the ball back in. Very important with the Heiniger balls, we always put flat to the back. Easiest way I like to put these back on is just a dab of grease on my finger. Find a flat. Roll that to the top. And simply just push on. Roll that down to the bottom. Tension pin goes up. Fork assembly just sits in there nice. Screw back in. Always make sure that you start these by hand. Very, very easy to cross thread. So start that off by hand and then we just finish off by tightening this with the screwdriver. There's no need to over tighten these too silly. So we've greased in here and here. In, twist, making sure that we've got the sharp end on the outside. There we go, and just check that these are still able to move. I always like to just put a dab of grease just in here, just for the comb screws. Obviously we've greased our cup, sliding sleeve, making sure this is really nice and free moving. Bit of grease around the thread. Back on. Don't forget our oil plug back in. Other parts to look for wear and tear on the handpiece is if we look at the comb bed, we see a lot of people when they undo the screws, they'll put a screwdriver in there and twist. Very effective way of getting off a comb that's stuck on there, but you're going to start chipping away at this here. Ideally, that's not a very good thing to do. Comb screws off and just check the comb bed as well for any gouges, anywhere. That's nice and smooth, that's perfect. And then we can just put these back. It's always good to visually inspect that. part of the handpiece. It's always very often forgotten. So that's our handpiece put back together, obviously minus the ferrule, ready for another day shearing.